may alert needed corrections to the clerk, but a correction would not be a motion from the floor. The record of the legislature or the Daily Journal is not to be subject to changes voted upon by the body, but must be an accurate recording of the proceedings of the legislature. Senator Wayne has moved to overrule the chair. All members may speak once. No member may yield time or ask questions of another member.
Motion overruled.
Senator Wayne, you're recognized to open on the motion to overrule the chair.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for the detailed outruling. A couple things here is one, somebody from outside this body is making a ruling on our procedures and how we govern, and I don't think we have ever abrogated or lost that right to debate the rules, debate anything, and to give our journal blanket guidelines to blanket right to just never correct it. In fact, every morning we ask for any corrections in the journal. Once there is a motion on the floor, any corrections in the journal, that can be a record vote. In fact, you can call for a record vote at any time. Therefore, if it's a record vote, we have the inherent right to keep that journal or keep that record. If somebody objects to a correction, then that is a debatable motion. One, we've already set precedent this year with that, but two, we vote on it every time. Now, while it is true, we give the clerk the authority, if that authority did not come before this body and we actually do it every day where we say, is there any correction to the journal? Then I would agree with the ruling here, but that's not the case. Every morning we start with a vote by unanimous consent on whether or not there are corrections to the journal. If there is a vote, a possibility of a vote, it is a debatable motion on the floor. That is just 101 Mason manual, and I think that's just 101 of how the body works. If there is correction to the journal and we say record vote, it is a vote. That means we dictate what goes in there and it's a debatable motion. To say that it's not, then why do we vote every morning? And we have a historical practice since 1970s of doing this. So we're saying the practice has been wrong for the last 50 years? I don't believe so. While it does in Mason Manual say in section 699 that the clerk may correct the journal, it does also outline how the body can correct the journal. So I do think it's relevant. I do think the body can. If we want to, allow another branch of government to dictate how we do things in here and make a ruling, that's fine. This is our opportunity to overrule. Two, we've already done it and nobody raised a point of order before. Well, we did it in this set in another past practice. But lastly, it's just fundamental votes. If every morning, and you can go up and ask the clerk, if every morning we can do a record vote on correction of the journal, which we can, then it is a vote. It is a motion before this body. That's just the facts. If we get to vote on it, we get to debate it, period. There are only certain things that are non-debatable, which are specifically listed in our rules, like a motion to adjourn, motion to sine die. Those are not debatable. Nowhere in there does it say corrections for the journal are not debatable. If it's debatable, it is a motion, therefore it can be done. And if we want to prolong this, I would dare somebody to ask me a question and then have the next objection be that we can't ask questions. Yielding time and asking questions are two different things. We can have a overrule of an overrule of overrule, and we can do overrule until we get to noon today. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I rise in support of the motion to overrule the chair and agree with the take that my friend Senator Wayne has put forward in regards to his analysis and reasoning on this. I also wanted to lift and reaffirm a couple of additional key points. The chair's ruling in regards to the speaker's point of order is out of step with our past practice in this regard. And the rules, and the other reason that I think that it's important to lift precedent and past practice is because we're required to in our very rules that we adopted unanimously. So here's how the structure of the rules kind of cascade in terms of our analysis and interpretation. One, if there's a rule on point, we utilize it. We also then look to tradition, custom, and usage, and that's particularly why precedent is important. And then finally, if there's any ambiguity, then and only then do we turn to the Mason's Manual. So number one, I want to acknowledge that from the chair's very ruling where he started with the Mason's Manual, that's out of step with what our rules require. Our rules require we utilize our rules, our custom, usage, and tradition, and then finally defer to Mason's Manual if and only if there is ambiguity or a question. So there is none, because we have taken this up in our pattern and practice under our existing rules, including just last week, when Senator Wayne brought forward identical motions before we commenced on the budget debate. And those were taken up as appropriately and in line with our past practice. So the presiding officer knows, even just last week, we had adhered to our existing custom and usage under our existing rules. And so now to change course, to change precedent, and to start with Mason's Manual, it's a violation of our rules on its face, and it also flies in the face of past precedent, including one established and reestablished just last week by Senator Wayne in regards to before we commenced on the budget debate. So I think that record speaks for itself and is credibly clear. Now, again, colleagues, you can dislike the outcome of where we have been previously or where we have been even last week, but the way to address that is not to start creating new precedent from the floor and allowing the presiding officer to do so. I think let's also state what's painfully obvious to everyone here. The long treatise excerpted from the Mason's Manual by the presiding officer wasn't just brought forward on the spot. So this is a well-orchestrated effort to undercut not only our rules, but also our precedent to achieve a goal. Whether it's gunning bills, whether it's stacking committees, whether it's changing precedent, whether it's changing rules without regards to a public hearing, here we are again out of step with our rules, our traditions, our custom, tradition, and usage. And why? For no other reason than an exertion of pure political power. Because they can. Because they can. Because they can today. And that's wrong. We have the rules set forward to protect our rights as individuals and to protect our rights as a collective. If you disagree with the rules, then you should have brought forward changes. We had a robust public hearing that was attended by hundreds of people. We put forward modest changes to our rules this year, and we did it together. But our rules say, our rules control, our custom controls, and then only do we go to Masons. The presiding officer started with Masons. That's a contravention. Our rules and our tradition are clear. We have the right to correct the journal, and we have done so by custom and tradition throughout the legislative session, including just last week. I urge you to overrule the chair, and I would be happy to ask Senator Wayne any questions in regards to how his motion was taken up last week, if he would so yield.
That's out of order, Senator.
Point of order.
Senator Conrad, please approach.
Senator Conrad, please approach. The point of order is ruled out of order. Senator Erdman, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Shall I proceed?
Senator Kavanaugh, please approach. Senator Erdman, please proceed.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I was going to do a point of order on your ruling, on your statement, Mr. President, when you said, Senator Wayne, you can open on your motion. That's an incorrect statement. There is no motion as far as being opening on. And I went through this yesterday pretty extensively. I read it real slow so everybody can understand it. Overruling the chair is not a motion that one gets to open and close on. We went through that. Rule 2, Section 10 speaks about a motion that you open on, and then you get 3 times to speak, and you can yield to others and answer questions, and you get a close. That has absolutely nothing to do with overruling the chair. There are 7 very small words that you need to understand completely in overruling the chair. No member may speak more than once. That's very simple. Even I can understand that. No member can speak more than once. So we say to Senator Wayne, you can open on your motion. When you say open on your motion, then you would also conclude that he gets to close on his motion, which is not true. So all of these things we're doing this morning are dilatory. We all know that. Very simple, very easy to figure out. This is dilatory. So I don't want to drag it out and overrule the chair on allowing someone to speak more than once on overruling the chair. And Senator Conrad talks about changing the precedents. I'm sick and tired of hearing about the precedents. Nothing is a precedence forever, because that was something other than that when you did it the first time. So if we decide to do something different, we decide to do something different, irregardless of the precedents. But we weigh heavily on the fact that we've always done this, or this is a precedent. That's crazy, all right? Follow the rules. So if Senator Wayne gets to speak twice, I will then stand up a point of order to overrule the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Hughes would like to recognize the physician of the day, Dr. Pat Hotovy of York. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. And Senator Ballard has some guests in the north balcony. 7 12th graders from Parkview Christian in Lincoln. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Kavanaugh, the ruling on your point of order was that it was out of order if I did not make that on the record. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, so I rise in the support of the motion to overrule the chair. We're getting a little thick in the objections and overrules and things. So I'll try to get back to where we originally were, which is that there was a motion to amend, correct the journal. There was an objection, and then it was ruled out of order. The chair went, either did some incredibly fast research or was provided some external information in anticipation of this debate. And I would again point out the same things that my colleagues, Senator Wayne and Senator Conrad, have pointed out, is that we are a wholly autonomous body separate from the other branches of the government of the state of Nebraska. We have our own authority that's invested by the Constitution of the state of Nebraska, by our rules and by the statutes of the state. And then we are individually elected by the members of our districts to represent those people and not those other branches of government. And so we have to make our own decisions in those constraints. We have a rule book that everybody can see. It's this hunter safety orange rule book. And it does, as Senator Conrad pointed out, set a hierarchy of how we're supposed to follow rules, which includes the rule book itself, our practice and procedure, and then Mason's manual. And as Senator Conrad correctly pointed out, we recently reaffirmed the practice and procedure to allow for a correction to the journal from the floor and an objection, and that is a debatable motion. We did that within the last week or two. So it's a very recently reaffirmed practice and procedure. If you get to that point, you do not go to the next step of analysis. Though I would point out, you can read things any way you want, and I did get the opportunity to pull up Mason's manual while we've been having this conversation and look at section 699 and section 700. And it does say that in approving the journal, the usual procedure is for the presiding officer to inquire if there are any corrections, which our presiding officer does, and there was a correction that was submitted and an objection to it. If any are suggested, they are made providing there are no objections. Providing there are no objections. There was an objection. I heard Senator Hunt. She sits right in front of me. She objected very clearly. I think there was no mistake. If there are no corrections and there is no further corrections, the presiding officer may say, there being no corrections or no further corrections, the journal stands approved. No particular form of approving the journal is required. So Mason's doesn't specifically speak to this point. It says that there's a method for asking for corrections and correcting it without objection, but it doesn't say if there's an objection that shall not be taken up by the body. It doesn't specifically say that we wouldn't have a discussion about it and that we wouldn't be able to vote on it. So in light of the fact that Mason's doesn't speak specifically to the point, in light of the fact that our rules first go to our pattern and practice, in light of the fact that we have recently established that our pattern and practice is to allow for a change from the floor and an objection and discussion of that, I think the appropriate thing is to do what we've done, which is to have that conversation about that correction and not divert from those rules. As Senator Erdman, I think, attempting to point out that precedent's only precedent until you change it, but the reason to change precedent is not, I don't like it. That is not an argument for changing the precedent. You can change the rules because you don't like them, but you can't change the precedent. And Senator Erdman, I know you've read this rule many times, but
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. There is a point for overruling the chair. It does say that members can only speak once unless by leave of the legislature. Now, you can interpret that any way you like, I suppose, in the way that most favorable to your position. But pattern and practice has established that in motions to overrule the chair, those who make the motion get an opportunity to open and close. So by leave of the legislature, in pattern and practice, we have allowed for that to be the interpretation of how a motion to overrule the chair proceeds. So if you want to read the letter of the rules, you got to read all the letters. So again, I rise in support of the motion to overrule the chair. And if we get to it, I would probably have questions about whether we should amend the journal as was suggested by the other Senator Kavanaugh. So if you want to take a look at the Mason's manual, I could probably print out the sections for anybody who wants to see it. If you don't have access to it, but I've got it on my computer here for you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Blood, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand in support of overruling the chair, and I'm enjoying this conversation, but I am going to take an opportunity to talk on something else, since we each only get one turn to talk. I have a bill, LB 413, which is a military families bill that has full body support, That was originally to be amended unto the bill that is first up today, but because of the filibuster is now not going to be heard. And then we asked the governor's office this morning if they would amend it into the TIOSA bill, because this is a priority bill for the Department of Defense. It is one of many of the interstate compacts that we have passed over the last 7 years that have been brought to us by the Military Families Office of the Pentagon. And we were just told that we are not also going to be allowed to amend it onto Senator Sanders' bill that she's carrying on behalf of the governor. So I want our veterans and our military families that follow the legislature, and I know many of you do, especially in District 3, because we have more veterans than any other district in Nebraska, is that we are here fighting for you. But unless you have certain privilege under the governor's office, either by party or favor, unless you are a committee chair and have favor with certain committee chairs, the chances this year of getting any good legislation through without that foundation is slim to none. And so I literally just canceled, before I found out that we were turned down, a doctor's appointment for my son. You guys know. That our family's been through a lot this year. I'm sorry, I apologize for that. And it's really frustrating to work your ass off every single day to try and get a good bill through. And have people talk to you and smile at you and say, you know what, we're going to help you get that bill out. We're going to help you get that bill through. And, you know, go take care of your family. But we can't take care of our family because we're babysitting here. I want you to think about how there's so much more than what's going on in here in many people's lives. We don't talk about it and we handle it. And sometimes we have to handle things for years, as in our family's case. So next time you tell somebody no, you can't help them, or yes, you're going to help them and you string them along for days, remember that this is not the only place that they have to be. Not all of us have the benefit of staying in a condo, an apartment, or a hotel. We have to drive back and forth when we go till midnight. And we sleep for 4 hours and come back here. We sleep for 4 hours and come back here. We are screwing over veterans. We're screwing over military families. And there's apparently nothing I can do. The governor's office made it clear they wanted to reach across the aisle, that the veterans are important, and we want to do better when it comes to working together. This is the first time I've reached out to the governor's office, and my first communication is a no. We passed bills that didn't need to be passed this year, things that didn't need to be codified, that would have happened with or without the legislation, that wasted our time. We put forward bills that were controversial in front of bills that could have easily passed. And now we have several weeks left, and we've gotten little to nothing done. And you can point fingers and you can blame, but we're all complicit and we all could have done better. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator McKinney, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I remember, what was it, last week or the week before, the same thing that Senator Kavanaugh attempted to do wasn't overruled, and me and Senator Wayne were allowed to debate. That's the most recent precedence that we set in this body. And then now today, the chair is ruling that it's out of order. I'm confused about how do we follow rules around here? 1 week something is okay, and then the next week it's not. I don't know if we should have been provided with an update to the rules every week to say, you know, this week, last week, these rules apply, but this week, these rules apply. We're flip-flopping on rules, precedent, what's right, what's not right, and it feels like it just depends on who starts a motion or is in the queue or whatever is happening, or whoever is in the chair. And I'm okay with people winning, but at what point do we win with dignity and grace? At what point do we win with, let's call it sportsmanship? You know, we tell kids all the time that play sports, if you win, walk off with respect. Don't do anything extra. If you're gonna win, but you don't have to do a bunch of extra things to make your opponent feel less than or anything like that. These are principles that we as a society have ingrained in the minds of many kids that are playing sports today. But us adults, we're not acting with sportsmanship. We're not acting according to the rules. We're deciding when and when not to follow the rules because we don't like somebody that is trying to do something. And we wonder why society is the way it is, because the principles that have been pushed to many generations under the older generations has not been followed. And that's why a lot of young people don't really listen to older individuals or seniors, because at many times in my life, and I would argue many people would say, those who set the standards don't follow the standards. And that's why people are called hypocrites and things like that. So how can it be okay to debate this same similar motion last week or whatever, but this week it's a no? That doesn't make sense to me. Where are we at in these rules? I think every week we should start the week with a speaker's announcement that the rules are changed. And what we did last week might not matter this week, because that's what's happening in this body, is that depending on the week, the rules are followed or not followed. Depending on who files the motion, the rules are followed or not followed. Depending on who acts for a call of the house, we might get it, we might not get it. And I'm not saying you have to like anybody that filed any of these motions, but follow the rules. We haven't been following the rules, and we wonder why this session has been so chaotic and out of control to a lot of people, and why things are happening and nobody really understands. We come in here every day and we don't know what's going to happen. That is literally what's happening with this session. Depending on the day and the week, the rules don't matter or they matter.
1 minute.
It's chaos or not chaos. And that is a problem. It's a fundamental problem. And I'm not a supreme institutionalist, because this institution has not worked in the best favor of my community for many years. But I will say, if we set rules, let's follow them. We should be following the rules. It shouldn't be last week, this was okay to debate, and this week it's not okay to debate. That doesn't make sense to me. And somebody needs to please get on the mic and provide some clarity how last week this was okay and this week it's not. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Senator Dungan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I do rise in favor of the motion to overrule the chair. And I think that this conversation we're having this morning is both substantive and actually really interesting. I would echo the sentiments that have been made by some of my other colleagues with regards to the changes with how we are conducting ourselves as a body that are happening so quickly, it's almost hard to keep up. At the beginning of this session, we obviously had a large conversation about rules and rules changes, and we talked about precedent, and we talked about where we came from. But one thing that I think we heard over and over again was the importance of having rules that were clear so that we can all adhere to them. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had somebody try to change the journal, and then somebody object to it, and then we debated that, I believe. And so the fact that now we're going back on that is surprising. I think it's confusing. I don't really understand why it's happening. And I frankly disagree with that ruling. Respectfully, I disagree with the ruling of the chair, and that's why I rise today in support of the motion to overrule the chair. And whether or not folks in this body agree with sort of why these things are being done or what the overarching point of these motions are, I think we can all agree that the rules are vital to follow and that without our rules, we're going to fall apart as a body. And one of the things that was drilled into my head during my new senator orientation was that part of the reason we talk so much about precedent and respect for the institution is not to do it just because it's fun, but because you never know when you're going to be the one who those rules protect. And you never know when you're going to be the one who needs the benefit of the protection that the minority sometimes enjoys through the process and procedure that we have here. And so I think we should be very careful when changing precedent. I did pull up Mason's manual as well. I've had a chance to review that. And again, I would respectfully disagree with the reading by the chair. It does say in section 699 that journals are usually corrected informally, saying the presiding officer directing the correction to be made when suggested. But if objection be made, a formal vote is necessary for the approval of the correction or the amendment. Now, that means that if an objection is made, a vote has to be taken. When I've read through my rules and when I've read through Mason's manual, the parts that I've had a chance to go through, it's very explicitly stated when something is not a debatable motion. And I think Senator Wayne pointed that out in his intro here. It's very clear in the rules if something is not debatable. And there's a finite or limited amount of things in our rule book that are not debatable motions, and it's always specifically stated. And so my reading of this is that in the absence of a specific clause saying that it's not debatable, then it is in fact a debatable motion. The other thing I think that's important to note here is that correction to the journal and the subsequent motion to the objection of that is in fact substantive, right? This is not just a procedural motion. This is not a call to the House. This is not asking what the next steps are of how we're going to conduct ourselves. Somebody is trying to actually change the content of the journal, saying that it is wrong, that it inaccurately reflects what was originally happened, and then someone else in the body is objecting to that change. And so that is a conversation about substance. It is not a conversation about procedure. And I believe that when we are having a substantive motion and a substantive objection, that absolutely is open to debate. And to Senator Erdman's point, he was talking about whether or not there's a motion where one can open or close on an overruling of the chair. Rule 1, Section 12, he's right, does specifically say no member may speak more than once on that challenge, but it goes on to say, unless by leave of the legislature. And so, I think it's really important that we read rules as a whole. And I think this is something that we've touched on, not just on this rules debate, but on other bills that have been before the legislature this year. We have to read things together. We have to read things as a whole. Thank you, Mr. President. Whether it's talking about the canal project, as Senator John Kavanaugh was talking about, reading that compact as a whole, whether it was the question as to whether or not 626 does in fact have criminal penalties by virtue of the fact that it doesn't have a repealer. You have to read legislation as a whole. You have to read rules as a whole. And so I absolutely believe that based on my reading of Mason's, this motion is substantive, it is debatable, and I do believe that our precedent has always been that in fact this is a motion where we can correct the journal from the floor. And so I'd urge my colleagues to join me in voting to overrule the chair respectfully. I simply believe that this is a conversation that we can and should be having as a body if somebody makes that motion. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. This has been an interesting learning experience. So last week, Senator Wayne introduced a correction to the journal. Senator McKinney objected, and it was a debatable motion, and we debated it. This week, the speaker asked for a ruling of the chair, and the chair ruled it's not allowable. So now we are doing a motion to overrule the chair. And when I was standing up at the front at the president's desk, and Senator Wayne and I were standing up there, Senator Hunt and Speaker Arch, and there was interesting back and forth between Senator Wayne and the clerk. And I I've definitely felt like I was in a beginner's class watching a master class debate on Masons versus our rules. And I did not understand most of it. It definitely got into some real deep cut lawyer talk. But what I did glean is that, like so many things in the law, it is not clear, and it is open for some amount of interpretation, and which was made clear to me by the fact that the clerk has interpreted it one way and Senator Wayne has interpreted it another way. And I honestly am not sure which one of them I agree with. I am, to use Senator McKinney's term, I think I am a bit more of an institutionalist, although I definitely understand that the system has worked to be a great disadvantage to Senator McKinney's community. But I am an institutionalist in that I really want to preserve the integrity of the legislature. I am severely concerned that the ship is at the dock and getting ready to sail on that. And I feel like myself and so many others are holding on to those ropes that you tie up the boat at the pier. We're holding on for dear life, and we are getting really severe rope burn in our hands as those ropes are just pulling through our hands. But we are there, we are at the dock, we are holding on as tight as we can. We are trying to keep the ship from sailing, and we need the rest of you to join us. We need you to join us in pulling the ship back to shore for the sake of the state, for the sake of the institution. We need you to join us. We need people in this body who don't agree with me on policy to stand up and speak about the integrity of the institution, the process, and how we are not following it and how that is diluting the work. That is what is happening, colleagues. That is what is happening. This body and this administration has become so used to winning everything that when something doesn't go your way, you blow Skittles up. You blow it up. You change the rules halfway through session. You change the way we do things. You undermine your own
1 minute.
committee process. You blow things up. It needs to stop. It needs to stop. And to those that think that, back to the 574 debate, that say, oh, if it fails, she's not going to stop, that's a lie. I am going to stop. I want to stop right now. There's nothing I want more in this entire universe than to stop. And everyone who knows me in this body knows that that's true. So if anybody says anything to the contrary, they are lying. They are lying. I am a woman of my word 100% of the time. They are lying. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator DeBoer, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, today is Senator Hunt's birthday. Happy birthday, Senator Hunt. That was a little bit of a less robust clapping than I would have hoped for. And gosh, I think that makes my point a little bit. We are losing our ability to recognize the humanity in the people next to us. Several people I consider to be good friends have come up to me in the last couple of days and said, well, we don't agree on anything, but we can still be friends, as though they have to justify it to themselves because apparently there's some thought that maybe we couldn't be friends. Nebraska, your legislature is blinking 3 times. We're not okay. And it is every single one of us in here. It's me, it's you, it's all of us. If you don't think this message is about you, it is every single person in here. We are failing, everyone. Every one of us is failing. We are not okay. Everyone in here is not okay. The arms race is still escalating. And even if the one with the most weapons wins, what are the collateral damages? I'm not willing to pay the collateral damages for the people who are speaking on my behalf. Are you? Are all of you willing to pay the collateral damages? What is a legislator? What is a legislator? Is a legislator a person who just comes and pushes buttons? Because we could get trained monkeys to do that. Actually, we couldn't. They would cost the state more than we do, but we could get robots. Robots are cheap. We could get robots to do that if this is just about pushing buttons. They told me when I came in here that this was about relationships. And I concurred because when you are in relationship with someone, you understand where they're coming from and why they're coming there. A man named Emmanuel Levinas wrote a book called Totality and Infinity. And in the opening pages of that book, which took me about a year to read, he says that ethics is what he calls faciality, sitting face to face with a person who you might otherwise think is different than you, sitting face to face with that person, that other, and saying, who are they? And not asking your own brain to decide who they are, but listening to them speaking from themselves.
1 minute.
Somebody asked me why I came into this body. I originally came into this body because I had seen a kind of a meltdown like this, and I had that Emmanuel Levinas in my head, and I said, we aren't listening to each other anymore. We're not seeing each other anymore. And I said, we got to do that. We got to listen to each other. We got to sit with each other. We're not even mixing socially like we used to. I can't know what your worldview is unless I sit and let you tell me. We have to get past the us and them and remember that we are a we. We're a we, colleagues.
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Senator Mosier, you're recognized to speak.
Good morning, colleagues. Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning to all those who are at home watching this and wondering what's going on. So the correction to the journal was as I understand it, an addition of a comma somewhere. So whether it was substantive, I think could be argued. I think this is a time waster, something to spend time. I don't think a lot of the senators really care about the journal. Comments were made about winning and losing, and that some are trying to win and some are losing. I'm not playing a game here. I'm not here to score more points than someone else. I vote the way I vote because what I believe, what my parents taught me, what my teachers taught me, what inspiration my faith gives me, those are the things that drive me. Some mentions were made of relationships in the legislature. I try to talk to everybody. You see me wander about. I try to pick up a little intel about what's going on in the body, and I talk to most everybody. Several senators have told me not to talk to them. More than 3 of them that I could think of. Don't talk to me. I don't want you to ask me about my family. And that's about the way it was delivered, just like that. So I don't think you can treat others like that and then they expect everyone to clap for your birthday. I've had numerous people come up to me in my district and ask what's going on and how I'm holding up and all this. I'm okay. I'm operating on my beliefs, on my standards, on the way I was raised, the inspiration that I feel. I'm frustrated at times, but I'm going to keep voting based on my beliefs and what I think we should do and what the residents of my district believe. We all represent 40,000 people in Nebraska, and not every district is the same homogeneous, or it's not, they're not homogeneous necessarily. Not the same, doesn't have the same standards necessarily. Some are more progressive, some are more conservative. But if I wasn't here, somebody else from my district would be here, and they would probably vote just the way I vote. So, you know, my conscience is clear. Somebody talked yesterday that they felt that the abortion ban and the gender affirmation bill could kill people. Since 1973, we've killed 200,000 babies in Nebraska. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Mosier. Senator Clemens, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for allowing me my one time to speak. And I agree with the person who suggests that only everyone should get one time to speak. The person who began this, I hope, does not get a chance to close and have 2 times to speak where I only get 1. Regarding part of the rules that I see that we're discussing is on page 6, Rule 1, Section 19. The clerk shall prepare a daily journal, and the presiding officer shall call for corrections thereof. After corrections, if any are made, the journal shall stand approved without motion. Corrections, if any are made, I would add by the clerk. The journal shall stand approved without motion. It doesn't say they're made by a senator. I think it would be helpful to clarify that. Last week, it's been mentioned that Senator Wayne did make a motion to correct the journal, but as I recall, there was no one that raised a point of order to challenge his motion to correct the journal. But today, when a motion was made to correct the journal, there was a challenge to that motion, and that's the major difference I see today. Similar to if someone proposes an amendment to a bill that's may not be germane, if nobody challenges whether it was germane, it's added to that bill. But if someone raises a point of order and challenges it, it may be ruled not germane and thrown out. But if, and like today, like last week, no one challenged his ability to make a correction to the journal, but today someone has, and I support the ruling of the chair. I oppose overruling the chair in this case. And it's clear that the motion made this morning was also dilatory. We have other parts of our rules that do say that dilatory motions are a violation of our rule and should not be allowed. And so for those reasons, I support the ruling of the chair. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clemens. Senator Vargas, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you very much. I stand in support of the overrule of the chair. I believe this is about preserving the integrity of the legislature and honestly the precedent that was set yesterday, and even what Senator Clemens mentioned. To my understanding, when Senator Wayne was trying to correct the journal, McKinney did object to that. But more importantly, we've already set the precedent on how this goes. This is a departure from that. Now, and I think we've said this on the mic many times. This is happening not because we think it's dilatory, but because of time and because of the stage we're in politics, and because of the outstanding bills that are up, and because of the new bills that are being added or resurrected, or however you want to describe it. That's the reason why this is happening. My concern is that we are changing the rules or changing the interpretations, and as a result, or they're being changed for us. As a result, this can have significant consequences on what's going to happen here for the next several days. I think we should overrule the chair. I think we need to make sure we keep a precedent. The tools, and I've said this before, the tools are still in our toolbox to continue to do this work. Even when there's times where I have disagreed with the way that things have been utilized in terms of the rules, they are the way that we operate. And these determinations being changed on similar motions is affecting our faith in the rules, whether we like the outcomes or not. They are what we agreed to in the terms of how we work together. And I'm worried that we are blurring those lines significantly. And I've said this to many people off the mic. People using the rules within the confines of this body, we allowed this to happen. We set the standard. So if we're going to change the standard or allow precedent or ruling to change the standard, that is going to undermine the integrity of the legislature. So I support overruling the chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Vargas. Senator Hunt, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would echo the very same things that Senator Wayne and Senator Conrad and Senator Duncan have said, and what Senator Vargas just said too. And I also disagree with what Senator Moser said, that other senators would vote the same way he does because he's following his values. He's acting the way his parents taught him to act, he said. I don't think that's true. I think that in the past, including his predecessor, senators would have voted differently because they put this institution before politics, because they put the work that they did here for the people who elected them ahead of relationships and personal preferences in this body. Because all of us are temporary here. We're not going to be here forever. But we want this institution to last beyond us. And that's why we have to stop chipping away at the rules and norms and customs in this body that make it what it is that's so great. I think that there is some anxiety among people who view themselves as leaders in this body, you know who you are, that if Senator Kavanaugh, quote unquote, wins, if we kill LB 574 and we allow LB 626 to stay dead as it is, that then she wins. And if they win, you lose. But actually, if she wins, to take your definition of that, you all win. You get the rest of the session. You get up or down votes 25 on everything else. You get to actually, freshmen, stand up and share your views and say something smart. You get consent calendar. You get gubernatorial appointments. You get 15 or so days of a normal session that you deserve, that the people of Nebraska deserve, and that we need to have for productivity and the regular course of order. If this stops, you win, actually. We've been receiving a lot of emails from folks in the second house who are Nebraska Legislature rules enthusiasts. And I know that there's a large set of people out there who are kind of hobbyists and experts and really know a lot about the legislative history in the body and our rules. And the emails I'm getting agree with Senator Wayne and agree with Senator Conrad and agree with protecting the precedent that we have in this body according to rules and customs. I think that those principles have to come before our personal relationships, before our politics, before our party. And that's something that people in this legislature have not yet had the courage to do. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Aguilar has some guests in the north balcony, 56 fourth graders from Jefferson Elementary in Grand Island. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Arch, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Since I called for the point of order on this issue, I wanted to at least summarize my thoughts on why and why I'm opposed to overruling the chair. I want to talk about it's been raised several times what happened last week when Senator Wayne brought a motion to correct the journal from the floor. Kind of reflecting on what Senator Clements said, that was debated, but it was debated because nobody raised a point of order. And Senator Clements is correct when he talks about germaneness as an example of that. If people do not object, there is not an issue of germaneness. And so in the same way, there was no point of order raised. It was allowed to be debated. After that, I went to Senator Wayne. And I told him that there were issues with correcting the journal from the floor. We needed to discuss that. With all the rest going on, we did not have a chance to sit down and discuss that. But I saw very clearly that what happened there was not in order, and from my perspective, and so that was one of the reasons why I raised the point of order this morning. As it relates to some other comments that have been made about not following the rules this session, I will tell you that this filibuster continues because we are following the rules. That's why. We are following the rules. We are allowing this filibuster to continue, and I have held to those rules. I have held to my February 10th memo. I have not gone back on that. And so it's not like whatever we choose in the morning, we just decide to do that day. Absolutely not. But we are pushing the boundary on our rules. We are testing these rules. We are challenging these rules. We are challenging our understanding of these rules. And to those who have talked about the integrity of this legislature, that is what threatens the integrity of the legislature from my perspective. So we have to hold to what these rules say and what they mean. And there is a process for changing the rules, and that opportunity will come. But this particular ruling that the chair ruled, I agree with. In our rules, which he quoted in Rule 1, Section 18, it says, the clerk of the legislature shall attend sessions, call the roll, and keep journal of proceedings. We have given the responsibility of that journal to the clerk. And we can make comments to the clerk when that announcements, do you have any announcements, corrections to the journal, and so forth? He makes those corrections to the journal. And when we have an issue with that, we go to the clerk and say, I have an issue with that. But I agree with this ruling of the chair. I would ask that you not overrule the chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Arch. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to close on the motion to overrule the chair.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, you know I call balls and strikes on these rules, and so I'm going to tell you, I do think now, after extensive more research, this is not a debatable motion, but not for what not the reasoning the chair gave. I'm going to outline the reasoning. Section 187, ironic 187. Those who don't know anything about criminal law find that kind of ironic. Who do? That lists a list of motions, and section 2 says privileged motions, and it says accuracy of the journal and records of the House. That's section 187 of the Mason Manual. So if you hop over to section 176 of privileged motions, you'll see that they're not debatable. So, and all those are listed as not debatable. So the rationale, I think how we got here is incorrect, but I do think the end result is correct. So I do want to make sure that's clear. But what this does mean is you can file a correction with the clerk. You can object, and it's a vote. We can take 50, 100 roll call votes before we get anywhere. So yes, it's not debatable, but it is a vote, just like the call of the House. And that means we can have votes all day if we want to. So that is where I'm at. So with that, I'll withdraw my motion to overrule the chair. However, I do want to raise a point of order on another issue after you rule on my withdrawing of that.
It's withdrawn. Senator Wayne, you're recognized for your point of order.
Point of order, during the debate, it was ruled that it was ruled by this body that we could not yield to a question. I believe that is incorrect. And Mason Manual clearly distinguishes between yielding time versus yielding a question. And I would love to have that conversation.
Speaker Arch and Senator Wayne, could you please approach? Senator Wayne, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. And after discussions with everybody, I'm comfortable where we are. I will withdraw my point of order at this time, Your Honor. I mean, Your Honor, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. It's withdrawn. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, new A bill, legislative bill 562A from Senator Dorn. It's a bill for enacting new appropriations, appropriates funds to aid in the carrying out of the provisions of legislative bill 562. That's all I have this time.
First. Mr. Clerk, for the first item on the agenda.
Mr. President, legislative bill 705. First of all, pending was a motion to, Senator Conrad had a motion to bracket and Senator Michaela Cavanaugh had a motion to reconsider that vote. Excuse me, Senator Conrad had a motion to recommit and Senator Conrad had a motion to recommit and Senator Cavanaugh had a motion to reconsider that recommit vote.
Senator Cavanaugh, you're recognized for a 1-minute refresh.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last night we went to a vote on Senator Conrad's motion and the motion failed and I filed a motion to reconsider the vote.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're next in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. President. All right, so it's 10:22, 10:23, I don't know. We had 20 minutes, I believe, left on the bill when we adjourned last night. So this goes till 10:40. So there we go. So part of the reason that I have a motion still pending on this bill is that there were several things added on to LB 705 on select file that I opposed. Also, it was brought to my attention that the committee amendment, it was Senator Merman's amendment. It's not listed as a committee amendment, but it's the chair of the committee and it's his bill, et cetera. Anyways, the committee amendment also struck and changed part of Senator McKinney's bill that had been amended into the underlying bill previously. And I disagree with that. So there we are. That is why I have a motion to reconsider the vote on the motion to recommit to committee. So I've said this before, it's always kind of hard to get into that groove. Like it takes a little bit of time to get into the groove. What am I going to talk about today? What am I going to do today? How am I going to talk about things? Am I going to talk about the bill? What am I going to do? And today I'm still like processing and thinking, and I'm processing and thinking about how I'm going to talk about the institution. Hold on. So this morning, we had a debate. I put in a motion, or not a motion, I put in a correction for the journal. Senator Hunt objected. Then the speaker asked for a ruling from the chair on whether or not we could do this. Then we had the debate on that. And ultimately, Senator Wayne made a motion to overrule the chair and withdrew that motion, but then wanted a ruling on whether or not we could yield to questions during that debate and withdrew that point of order. I bring this up because, yeah, I'm trying to take time. I'm being an obstructionist 150%, 2,000%, infinite percent. Yes, I am doing that. But I care about this place. I care about the process. And I appreciate us not voting on something that might be disruptive to the integrity of the institution. I'm still going to use the rules to the maximum capacity that I can. I'm still going to work within the rules at every turn to take every minute that I can. But I am never going to try to dilute this place. It is that simple. What Senator Wayne did was an attempt to not dilute this place, to work within the rules.
1 minute.
To take the time to have the conversation this morning about the process, about the rules, but not to dilute it. And there has been inconsistency. To Senator McKinney's point, there has been inconsistency. But that's going to happen. I don't know that the inconsistency in how we have done things is, I don't think it's intentional, and I don't think that it's malicious. I think that it is the nature of the work that sometimes things happen quickly, and that can lead to inconsistency in how we are ruling on things, which is why it is important to slow down sometimes when we're making these rulings, when we're having these conversations. It's important to slow down and make sure we are being consistent. And as Senator John Kavanaugh said yesterday, we are not our worst mistake.
That's your time,
or something
Senator.
like that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. While the legislature is in session and capable of transacting business, I propose to sign and do hereby sign legislative resolutions 115, 116, and 117. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I didn't know I was next. To clarify, I had said we're not the worst thing that we've ever done. Just kind of a point of everybody makes mistakes, and you have the opportunity always to do the right thing the next time. It's the idea of redemption, which I'm sure a number of people around here subscribe to, either philosophically or religiously. But I appreciated the conversation about the rules. It's always fun to have a conversation about the rules and the actual kind of parsing the rules. And I certainly appreciate Senator Wayne's analysis of both Mason's and our own rule book. And I, of course, appreciate the clerk's analysis and consistency and knowledgeableness. I don't know what the right word is. Knowledgeability? Whatever the right word is to just say how smart he is about the rules. And the problem we have is not so much that sometimes people that I agree with pursue a tack that maybe is a misunderstanding of the rules or is a misanalysis. I think it's fine to make an argument that you believe in that may be wrong. I mean, I've done it lots of times, and you've all heard me get up here and make what they say, wish Senator Duncan was here. There's a law school saying that is, an argument is forcefully asserted and plausibly maintained. And Senator Wayne does a great job at that, right? Where we make an assertion and you have to have an argument to back it up. You point to the law, you point to case law, you point to facts, you point to a rational analysis, as the chair pointed to our rules and Mason's manual. So you do all those things, and you have to do it, in a good faith way, which is you have to have a good faith basis to make that argument. And too often here we are diverting from precedent to get to an outcome that we prefer. And obviously this place is getting more and more pressure to break the logjam, to move forward. And we saw it early in the session with the change in the rules, which predictably did not change the situation here. We just went against our precedent and our history and our tradition and amended the rules middle of the session to prevent one tactic that was being used. And of course, other tactics emerge, as to paraphrase one of my fellow senators, that the legislature finds a way, that the filibuster finds a way. And it will continue. And the reason that the filibuster has continued and has maybe taken on more intensity is because of the continued, divergence from what is important to the people of the state of Nebraska. And so, like I said yesterday, I hadn't talked in a while because I was trying to work constructively off of the floor to find a way forward. And I did engage in those conversations and a lot of hours trying to find ways to make this place work the way that we all hope it would, and was met with, not a lot back, I guess.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. So we'll see where this conversation goes. I think there's still more to talk about the specifics of the rules. But I do support LB 705 as it stands. And thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Hunt, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll yield my time to Senator Kavanaugh, Michaela Kavanaugh.
Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will withdraw my motion.
It is withdrawn. It is withdrawn. Mr. Clerk.
Senator, first of all, I have E&R amendments.
Senator Ballard, for what purpose do you rise?
Mr. President, I move the E&R amendments to LB 705 be adopted.
Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, pursuant to that, Senator Merman would move to amend with FA 94 with a note that he wishes to withdraw and substitute AM 1681.
Senator Merman, you're without objection, so ordered. Senator Merman, you're recognized to open.
So good morning. AM 1681 makes some needed corrections to the enrollment and review. And that's all it does. So I'll yield my time back.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Linehan, you're recognized to speak.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I had ice in my mouth. So my understanding, Senator Merman, could you yield to a question?
Senator Merman, will you yield to a question?
Yes.
There's some confusion, so I just want to see if I can make it less confusing. I'm pretty sure I can't straighten out all the kinks. But the original committee amendment, that's gone away now. And then this amendment is the one that basically just fixes things. Like I think Senator DeBoer, we had to add some language so we could pull down federal funds. And I think on mine, there was a little fix-it. So this is just a fix-it amendment. And most importantly, it doesn't do anything to affect Senator McKinney's bill that's in this bill that is about expelling little kids.
That's correct. Doesn't
Okay.
do anything with Senator McKinney's bill.
Okay, thank you. So I would ask for your green vote on this because it doesn't change anything substantive. It just makes the bill better. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I rise in support of the amendment and appreciate Senator Merman and Senator Linehan's explanation thereof. I know we have a very limited amount of time left on this measure, and I think they did a good job of explaining some of the changes that were brought forward in response to fidelity to the committee's original intent and to ensure any technical changes that needed to be made as well. The other thing I just want to note, and a new day, a new challenge, a new opportunity. So we went through another tough debate this morning, fairly chaotic, some hard feelings remain, but we have to keep moving forward. We have to keep talking to each other. We have to keep working together. We have to find and seek consensus wherever we can find it. And there's a lot of important measures to benefit public education in LB 705. And I also just wanted to note that maybe it's a happy accident, maybe it's fortuitous. This is Teacher Appreciation Week, folks. I know that because as a mom of 2 elementary school students, I've helped in the past to organize teacher appreciation events, and we were talking on the way to school this morning about how we could honor our teachers this year in Riley Elementary because they're so dynamite, and we don't get a chance to say thank you enough for their service. I also then was thinking about those that have teaching experience in our body, Senator Walz, Senator Vargas, and the passion that they bring for education and the experience and expertise they share with this body. I'm thinking about my mom, who is a lifetime public school teacher and instilled that love for lifelong learning in me. I am a product of public education, kindergarten through law school, and I'm thinking about my teachers in that little country school in Staplehurst that sparked so much love of learning, the incredible opportunities I had coming through Seward Public Schools, and then at the university when I came to Lincoln in the 90s and attended law school at a public university as well. So I'm thinking about my neighbors, I'm thinking about my constituents who love our public schools and who pour in with their volunteer hours, with modest donations, who are doing hard work every single day in between working many jobs to help kids with homework. And I'm really proud of our public schools in Lincoln and across the state. I'm proud of the teachers that make them great. And I want to refocus just for a moment, even when it's tough, on the important components here to benefit teachers in Nebraska as part of this package. There's parts of this package I don't agree with, I voted against, but there's a lot in here to like. And that's how legislating works, even in tough years like this. We give a little, we find some common ground, we try to recognize priorities that are important to other colleagues, and we try and put together something that resembles consensus to try and make a positive difference. I think the Education Committee worked very hard to do that with this package. I think that we are all aware of the session dynamics that are before us, which makes for a broader committee package than we would normally see, but trying to work in good faith to manage these different dynamics.
1 minute.
I don't think we have a perfect product here, but I think we have a very good product, and we should never let perfect be the enemy of good. No doubt, thank you, Mr. President, we'll need to make perhaps some changes in the interim and bring some things forward in the 2024 session. And the other thing that I want to lay down a marker on is we have to take up as a first order of priority additional strategies like Senator Blood's measure in regards to addressing the teacher shortage. And we've got to take up measures that Senator Walz and Senator McKinney and Wayne have brought forward to address school nutrition and the overall poverty assessment in our school funding formula. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank the committee staff. The committee staff for education has been working, Jack has been working his tail off since last night to solve a lot of the problems that were existing on this bill, a lot of them. The chairman of this committee hasn't spoken to me. That's fine. So clearly I'm not allowing this amendment to get up here for the chairman, but I do appreciate that the committee staff worked really hard to address the concerns so that the essential work that needed to happen, happened. Also, I appreciate Senator Linehan working on this and really helping bring this together with Senator Conrad and all the others. There's so many other people that were working on this overnight, but to be honest, Senator Conrad, Senator Linehan, and Jack Spray got me to pull my motion. So thank you. Thank you for working on this. Thank you for getting this up here and in shape to do what we needed done for this bill. And it's important to understand what working together looks like. There were a lot of things filed on this bill that I viewed as extremely harmful. And so you can think that like I'm just taking time because I'm taking time on everything, but I genuinely found the amendments filed on LB 705 to be extremely harmful. And under normal times, I probably would have filibustered this bill on select file for those reasons. But like I said this morning, if 574 had died or does die, I'm not filibustering anything at all. Not a thing. I am walking out. I am done. Senator Mosier said that he doesn't vote for things for winning and losing or whatever. And that's great. I'm glad to hear that. I keep being told that people are going to vote for something because they can't let me win. And colleagues, I am not winning. I am not winning. Not even a little bit. And even if you see me smiling, it is a fake smile. It is a facade. I am not happy. I am not enjoying myself. I am getting pieces of joy when my husband sends me pictures of my kids or artwork that they're doing for me, which is adorable, and I love it. So please keep doing it, Nick. But that's it. That's my only joy. I'm not happy. I'm not winning. No matter how any vote turns out, I'm not winning. I'm not. I take no pleasure in filibustering people's bills, even people who I don't agree with on pretty much anything. I don't take pleasure in filibustering your bills. That's not who I am. I am doing everything that I am doing for a purpose, for a reason. And all of it is to protect kids. I'm just smiling because I know that I'm getting a text message right now of the camera shot. I just know it for a fact, but that's fine. Yeah, I think we're at about cloture on this. So I just was taking my full amount of time because we're almost to cloture. So there we go. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Clerk, you have a motion on your desk.
I do, Mr. President. Senator Merman would move to invoke cloture on LB 705 pursuant to Rule 7, Section 10.
Senator Merman, for what purpose do you rise?
Call of the House, roll call vote in reverse order.
There's been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Request for a roll call vote. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Aguilar, voting yes. Senator Albright, not voting. Senator Arch, voting yes. Senator Armendariz, voting yes. Senator Ballard, voting yes. Senator Blood, not voting. Senator Boston, Senator Bostar, voting yes. Senator Bostelman, not voting. Senator Brandt, voting yes. Senator Brewer, voting yes. Senator Breezy, voting yes. Senator John Kavanaugh, Voting yes, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Voting yes, Senator Clements. Not voting, Senator Conrad. Voting yes, Senator Day. Senator DeBoer. Voting yes, Senator DeKay. Voting yes, Senator Dorn. Voting yes, Senator Dover. Senator Dungan. Senator Erdman. Voting no, Senator Frederickson. Voting yes, Senator Holleran. Not voting, Senator Hansen. Voting yes, Senator Hardin. Voting yes, Senator Holcroft. Voting yes, Senator Hughes. Voting yes, Senator Hunt. Voting yes, Senator Ibach. Voting yes, Senator Jacobson. Voting yes, Senator Kauth. Voting yes, Senator Linehan. Voting yes, Senator Lippincott. Voting yes, Senator Lowe. Voting no, Senator McDonald. Voting yes, Senator McKinney. Senator Mosier. Voting yes, Senator Merman. Voting yes, Senator Raybold. Voting yes, Senator Reapy. Voting yes, Senator Sanders. Voting yes, Senator Slama. Voting yes, Senator Vargas. Voting yes, Senator Von Gillern. Voting yes, Senator Walls. Voting yes, Senator Wayne. Voting yes, Senator Wishart. Voting yes. Vote is 37 nays, 2 nays to go under call, Mr. President.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. All unexcused members are present. Members, the first vote is on the motion to invoke cloture. All those in favor, a roll call vote was requested. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Wishart. Voting yes, Senator Wayne. Not voting, Senator Walls. Voting yes, Senator Von Gillern. Voting yes, Senator Vargas. Voting yes, Senator Slama. Voting yes, Senator Sanders. Voting yes, Senator Reapy. Voting yes, Senator Raybold. Voting yes, Senator Merman. Voting yes, Senator Mosier. Voting yes, Senator McKinney. Voting yes, Senator McDonald. Voting yes, Senator Lowe. Voting yes, Senator Lippincott. Voting yes, Senator Linehan. Voting yes, Senator Kauth. Voting yes, Senator Jacobson. Voting yes, Senator Ibach. Voting yes, Senator Hunt. Voting no, Senator Hughes. Voting yes, Senator Holcroft. Voting yes, Senator Hardin. Voting yes, Senator Hansen. Voting yes, Senator Holleran. Voting yes, Senator Frederickson. Voting yes, Senator Erdman. Voting yes, Senator Dungan. Voting yes, Senator Dover. Voting yes, Senator Dorn. Voting yes, Senator DeKay. Voting yes, Senator DeBoer. Voting yes, Senator Day. Senator Conrad. Voting yes, Senator Clements. Not voting, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Not voting, Senator John Kavanaugh. Voting yes, Senator Breezy. Voting yes, Senator Brewer. Voting yes, Senator Brandt. Voting yes, Senator Bostelman. Voting yes, Senator Bostar. Voting yes, Senator Bosson. Senator Blood. Voting yes, Senator Ballard. Voting yes, Senator Armendariz. Voting yes, Senator Arch. Voting yes, Senator Albright. Not voting, Senator Aguilar. Voting yes. Vote is 42 ayes, 1 nay, Mr. President, on the motion to invoke cloture.
The motion to invoke cloture is adopted. The next vote is on the adoption of AM 1681. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Request for a roll call vote. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Aguilar. Voting yes, Senator Albright. Voting no, Senator Arch. Voting yes, Senator Armendariz. Voting yes, Senator Ballard. Voting yes, Senator Blood. Voting yes, Senator Boston. Senator Bostar. Voting yes, Senator Bostelman. Not voting, Senator Brandt. Voting yes, Senator Brewer. Voting yes, Senator Breezy. Voting yes, Senator John Kavanaugh. Voting yes, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Not voting, Senator Clements. Not voting, Senator Conrad. Voting yes, Senator Day. Senator DeBoer. Voting yes, Senator DeKay. Voting yes, Senator Dorn. Voting yes, Senator Dover. Voting yes, Senator Dungan. Voting yes, Senator Erdman. Voting no, Senator Frederickson. Voting yes, Senator Holleran. Voting no, Senator Hansen. Voting yes, Senator Hardin. Voting yes, Senator Holcroft. Voting yes, Senator Hughes. Voting yes, Senator Hunt. Voting yes, Senator Ibach. Voting yes, Senator Jacobson. Voting yes, Senator Kauth. Voting yes, Senator Linehan. Voting yes, Senator Lippincott. Voting yes, Senator Lowe. Not voting, Senator McDonald. Voting yes, Senator McKinney. Voting yes, Senator Mosier. Voting yes, Senator Merman. Voting yes, Senator Raybold. Voting yes, Senator Reapy. Voting yes, Senator Sanders. Voting yes, Senator Slama. Voting yes, Senator Vargas. Voting yes, Senator Von Gillern. Voting yes, Senator Walls. Voting yes, Senator Wayne. Not voting, Senator Wishart. Voting yes. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh voting yes. Vote is 40 yeas, 3 nays, Mr. President, on adoption of the amendment.
AM 1681 is adopted. The next vote is the adoption of the E&R amendments. All those in favor? Request for a roll call vote. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Aguilar. Voting yes, Senator Albright. Voting no, Senator Arch. Voting yes, Senator Armendariz. Voting yes, Senator Ballard. Voting yes, Senator Blood. Voting yes, Senator Boston. Senator Bostar. Voting yes, Senator Bostelman. Not voting, Senator Brandt. Voting yes, Senator Brewer. Voting yes, Senator Breezy. Voting yes, Senator John Kavanaugh. Voting yes, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Voting yes, Senator Clements. Voting no, Senator Conrad. Voting yes, Senator Day. Senator DeBoer. Voting yes, Senator DeKay. Voting yes, Senator Dorn. Voting yes, Senator Dover. Voting yes, Senator Dungan. Voting yes, Senator Erdman. Voting no, Senator Frederickson. Voting yes, Senator Holleran. Not voting, Senator Hansen. Voting yes, Senator Hardin. Voting yes, Senator Holcroft. Voting yes, Senator Hughes. Voting yes, Senator Hunt. Voting yes, Senator Ibach. Voting yes, Senator Jacobson. Voting yes, Senator Kauth. Voting yes, Senator Linehan. Voting yes, Senator Lippincott. Voting yes, Senator Lowe. Voting yes, Senator McDonald. Voting yes, Senator McKinney. Voting yes, Senator Mosier. Voting yes, Senator Merman. Voting yes, Senator Raybold. Voting yes, Senator Reapy. Voting yes, Senator Sanders. Voting yes, Senator Slama. Voting yes, Senator Vargas. Voting yes, Senator Von Gillern. Voting yes, Senator Walls. Voting yes, Senator Wayne. Not voting, Senator Wishart. Voting yes.
Senator Kavanaugh, for what purpose do you rise?
I don't.
State your point of order.
Thank you. I don't believe we made a motion to adopt the ENR amendments.
Could you approach, Senator? Senator Kavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I apologize. I was incorrect. I withdraw my point of order.
It is withdrawn.
Mr. President, 41 nays, 3 nays on adoption of the ENR amendments.
The ENR amendment is adopted. Senator Ballard for a motion.
Mr. President, I move that LB 705 be advanced to ENR for engrossing.
Members, there's been a request for a machine vote. All those in favor to advance, vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
39 ayes, 4 nays on advancement of the bill, Mr. President.
The bill is advanced. I raise the call. Mr. Clerk for items.
Mr. President, next bill on the agenda, Legislative Bill 583. Senator Hunt would move to bracket the bill with MO 685 until June 2nd, 2023.
Senator Hunt, you're recognized to speak on your motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Clements yield to a question?
Senator Clements, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Clements. Did you ever, so the last bill that we just did, LB 705, did you ever take any time and speak on that bill? I don't remember.
Probably not.
Why didn't you support the bill?
I asked, I would rather not see 25 bills in one, and there's some that I would rather not have in the.
Which bills were you opposed to in the bill?
Also, I asked the committee chair for a total of the fiscal note, where the money was coming from, probably mainly the fact that I still am sitting here working on trying to find out where all the funding is coming from. And so that would probably be my main reason.
Okay, so Senator Merman wasn't able to get you information about how LB 705 with the 25 bills in it that you say is going to be funded?
Yes, I asked late last night. I received the paper this morning and just came back from the fiscal and was still trying to do some computations on the various fund sources. There were 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 lines and 2 columns. So I'm still not clear as to what the cost of this is in our budget.
Okay, thank you. What bill, so I'm not sure it's 25 bills. Do you know if it's 25 or is that an estimation?
I don't know for sure.
Okay. Which bills were you opposed to in that package?
I wouldn't have a comment on that.
Okay. Yeah, you didn't make a comment during the debate either, so I wanted to check. Thank you, Senator Clements. Senator Erdman, would you yield to a question?
Senator Erdman, will you yield to a question? I don't believe he's present, Senator.
Okay. Senator Albright, would you yield to a question, please?
Senator Albright, would you yield to a question?
No.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for clarifying your positions. I think it's good to get on the record and note that Senator Albright's not willing to answer a question, just as she wasn't willing to answer questions about her priority bill during her committee hearing, and that Senator Clements has a problem because there are so many bills put into this package. I think that's good to get on the record because it's important that we have some kind of precedent and some kind of record of how many bills we are packing into these packages, into each of these underlying bills. Given that this may give us some legal challenges down the road, that of course the cost for that would be given to the Nebraska taxpayers. Or we could kill LB 574 and never mind all that. On LB 583, Senator Sanders' bill here, at the request of the governor, to provide for foundation aid and special education supplemental aid under the Tax Equity and Educational Opportunity Support Act, TEOSA. I'm a proud product of public schools. I went to Blair Public Schools. We didn't have any parochial schools or any private schools in Blair at the time, actually. So basically everybody went to that school, which is a common experience in Nebraska. There are more and more private schools and parochial schools now than there were when I was a kid. And I went to a Lutheran church for preschool. I went to Joy Preschool in Blair, Nebraska, but I was raised Catholic. And so I'm not sure why my parents picked that preschool, but for whatever reason, they thought that was the best thing. And I had a really great time in preschool. My preschool teacher was amazing. Mrs. Schott, Ronnie Schott. One of the things I remember most was her leaving the classroom for a little while one day, which I don't even know if a teacher could do that today, but she left the classroom for maybe 5 minutes or something. And she came, mind you, we're in preschool. What are we, 3, 4 years old? She comes back in dressed as Johnny Appleseed, and we believed it was Johnny Appleseed. And she's talking about, I'm Johnny Appleseed. I'm walking across the country and planting seeds to grow trees. And here's how I cook with apples. Then we did all these recipes with apples, and legit for years, maybe not years, but at the time, certainly we all thought that was really Johnny Appleseed, which is one of those moments of childhood magic that a good teacher can provide. And one of the things that was always a cornerstone of my education and all of us in Nebraska was lunchtime. And whether you're going through the line in the cafeteria or you're getting a sack lunch from home, I had a sack lunch from home every single day. And any of you who know anything about my eating habits won't be surprised by this, but I ate the same lunch every day for 12 years plus kindergarten, for 13 years. Peanut butter and jelly sandwich, some kind of fruit cup, could be pears or peaches, could be applesauce, a bag of chips, a small bag of chips. I went through different phases with the chips, which was the experimental and adventurous part. We could do Fritos, we could do Lay's potato chips, or we could do Cheetos, but nothing else. And Cheetos were the only kind of chip I would accept that had any kind of flavor dust on it or something like that. Sometimes a granola bar, sometimes a pudding cup, but usually that was it. And my mom had this rule in our house: no Little Debbie, no Hostess, and no artificial sugars or fake ingredients. And I feel like my mom was this early granola mom, before we, almond mom, before we had that, which is what we call that now. And anything that we were eating or consuming was either all natural, local, farmer's market, or she made it, homemade. And one of the biggest frustrations for me with this, and for my brother too, who's 4 years younger than me, he's in the Navy and he works at the White House, which I can't believe because he's my little brother and I can't believe he got a job like that, but I love him so much and I'm so proud of him. We weren't allowed to have popsicles, like the flavor ice, the popsicles that come in the plastic tube that you can get a box of 200 of them for $5 or something. And I loved those. They were so good. And my mom would not let us have them because they had artificial flavor and sugar. And so we would go to our friends' houses and get those flavor ice popsicles. But there was one exception in our house, and that was for Kool-Aid. And I don't know why my mom had this exception where we had to have this all natural juice, everything all the time, except Kool-Aid. Maybe it's Nebraska pride. Maybe she knows this is coming from Senator Halloran's district in Hastings. I don't know, probably not that. But she had no problem with us having Kool-Aid. And I think in retrospect, it's because Kool-Aid is an activity. You don't just peel the foil off the top and drink it. You have to make it. And my mom was always trying to figure out activities for us, things we could make to keep us busy. And we did do half sugar. You're supposed to put a cup of sugar in there, and we would do a quarter cup or half a cup. But we had a Velveeta cheese. Now, don't get on her about the Velveeta cheese. I don't know why she had that. I didn't eat it. She wouldn't let me eat that. But We had an empty Velveeta cheese box in the middle drawer in our kitchen that was full of packets of Kool-Aid. And every time we went to the only 1 minute? Thank you, Mr. President. Every time we went to the grocery store, my mom would let me and my brother each pick 4 or 5 packets of Kool-Aid to bring home. And that probably kept us busy the entire time at the grocery store. Me and Matt just looking at all the different flavors of Kool-Aid. There are some flavors that are rare that are not made anymore. Pink Swamingo, the great Blue Dini, which when you pour it in, it's green, but then when you mix it up, it turns blue. And the activity of making the Kool-Aid and so many of these flavors that are no longer even available, you can get them on eBay for hundreds and hundreds of dollars now because there are Kool-Aid collectors. But these are some of the memories that are such a cornerstone in my life from that public school experience. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator Sanders, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you and good morning, Mr. President and colleagues. This bill, introduced on behalf of the governor, was a product of the governor's public school education finance working group that met 3 times between the election day of 2022 and the beginning of this year's legislative session. LB 583 passed the Education Committee and was placed on general file on March 30th. The bill then passed the general file on April 14th with an overwhelming majority of the body's support. I wanted to jump in the queue to give you a quick refresher on 583. On general file, LB 583 was amended with AM 970 with a white copy that replaced the bill. Under AM 970, this bill infuses $300 million annually into the public school through 2 mechanisms. First, the state ensures that 80% of special education costs are reimbursed to the districts. This funding takes place inside the TIOSA formula, but as we discussed on general file, it does not offset other state aid until the 3rd year. Secondly, we create foundational aid that sends $1,500 per student to the prospective districts. This also is inside the formula until the 3rd year, when 40% of these funds will be placed outside of the TIOSA formula. This ensures that every school district benefits from LB 583, equalized or unequalized. Additionally, there is a reporting requirement and protections against the double dipping with option enrollment benefits on top of the foundation aid. I do want to mention that I have an amendment on the board today that fixes an error in the amendment we adopted on general file. Under AM 970, a technical wording error rendered the special education funding inoperable. My AM 1636 addresses that issue and makes other small changes to the reporting requirement efforts to clean up the language. I want to stress this amendment is vital to the bill's operationability and 80% of the special education funding. I look forward to the discussion today. I look forward to introduction of AM 1636 when it comes up. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Good morning again, colleagues. I rise in support of Senator Sanders' measure that she has brought forward on behalf of the governor. I so appreciate serving with Senator Sanders. By the luck of the draw, or perhaps an unlucky aspect from her perspective, she and I have a chance to serve on both of our committee assignments for 5 days out of the work week. So we're on education and government committee together. And I have long admired her leadership and her approach to governance, and have deepened that appreciation when having a chance to work with her as a colleague firsthand on those key issues before education and government. So I added my name as a co-sponsor to this measure, and in light of the fact that for many, many, many years, we've talked about the need to increase resources for our great public schools and to try and figure out a way to do more to ensure educational equity, academic success, keep an eye towards the understanding that every dollar that we invest from the state level helps to reduce reliance on local property taxes, which of course is another key perennial issue and public policy challenge in Nebraska. So trying to thread the needle to figure out how we can provide property tax relief, even though we don't levy property taxes on the state level, but also not diminish or hurt our strong public schools, is a challenge that Nebraska has grappled with for decades and continues to grapple with. I think that there was a well-deserved sigh of relief when Governor Pillen convened a school funding task force to take up these issues pre-session. And one of the key centerpieces to the education task force work, of course, is in Senator Sanders' amendment. And there are a lot of details to tease out, and I want to visit with her and others about the amendment that's filed, so I have a clearer and better understanding of that. But from a top lines, big picture perspective, the good news is this is about infusing more resources into public schools. The good news is this is about ensuring that the state does a better job, because our federal partners fall short, in ensuring we're providing schools with the resources they need to help educate and meet the needs of students with special needs and in the special education realm. So I know that, of course, the devil's always in the details, and we need to have a clear understanding of the technical aspects and the amendments that are filed there too. But just from, kind of setting the stage for this debate at the outset, those are the two main components that I'm excited about in regards to Senator Sanders' bill that she's brought forward today. Increased resources for public schools and a better investment, a better infusion of resources to help schools meet the needs for special education, which has been historically underfunded on the federal level and on the state level. So each dollar that we can move in that direction, in both of those directions, I think helps to improve our shared goals to ensure educational success and helps to lessen reliance on local property taxes. So overall, I just wanted to set the stage for that. I wanted to thank not only Senator Sanders, but the Education Committee for moving this forward. I wanted to give credit where credit is due. I have a significant amount of policy disagreements with Governor Pillen, but I appreciate his meaningful engagement with the legislature. I appreciate that one of the centerpieces of his agenda this year has been, thank you, Mr. President, has been to infuse more resources into our public schools with this measure. And of course, the corresponding Education Future Fund, which is part of the budgetary package as well, to ensure that we can stabilize education funding when the economy does meet an inevitable downturn, and ensure that we learn the hard lessons from the past, that we're not starting out by cutting education when we hit hard times, but we're building in an additional safeguard to prioritize the resources for our great public schools. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Walz has some guests in the north balcony, 14 fourth graders from Trinity Lutheran in Fremont, Nebraska. Please stand and be recognized. Senator Linehan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And good morning again, Mr. colleagues. I rise in support of 583 Senator Sanders' bill, and of course against the bracket. We're getting a lot done today, and I think maybe because of other issues we don't realize quite all what we've done, but I'm going to start, and I'll be up my 3 times on this bill. I'm going to start with talking about the Education Committee. Chairman Merman, we've had a lot of long exec committees, and we had a lot of hearings. And I told one of my colleagues this morning, when it comes to these issues, everybody is emotionally involved because we've all been students in school. Many of us have children who are in school or who have attended school. And some of us, lucky ones, now have grandchildren in school. So this, you know, I remember the jokes used to be when I've been in politics, around politics for 30 years, really longer, but I don't like to say longer. It makes me too old. There's nothing worse than being on the school board or the city council because it's closest to the people. And I think in today's world, the school board is probably the hardest one to be on. So back to our committee. I'm going to talk about it a little bit. We have Senator Merman, who's our chairman. We have Senator Albright, who is in my class, which means she's got 1 year left. And you have all that experience. We have Senator Breezy, who's also in our class, who's been here. He's now in his 7th year with all that experience. We have Senator Conrad, who's been 8 years, now going on 9 years, and her experience. We have Senator Sanders, who's been a mayor, has raised 2 kids, has a grandchild, and she's on our committee. And we have Senator Walls, who is chairman of the committee for 2 tough years, and her heart's all in all the time. And we have Senator Wayne, who, before he was in the legislature, who's also in our class, and before he was in the legislature, served both on the Omaha School Board and the learning community. A lot of history tied in there, a lot of things in the bills that we're doing today that we have been working on since we got on the Education Committee. Senator Walls is also in our class. So I guess the moral of that story is there's a lot of openings in 2 years on the Education Committee. So some of you who aren't on education, who want to be on education, should be paying very close attention today on these bills. Now I'll go to the bill that's up there now. Governor Pillen has made a commitment, and it started as Senator, I think it was Walls, it might have been Senator Conrad mentioned. He started with listening sessions before he was even sworn in. He heard loudly and clearly what we had heard for 6 years, that we don't trust the legislature. We tried to work on that by not moving the levers up and down, but we couldn't overcome that. So Governor Pillen committed $1 billion to Education Trust Fund. And Senator Clements, Chairman of Appropriations, carried that bill, and it's in the budget. $1 billion to Education Trust Fund. And I didn't give Senator Clements a heads up, so I'm not going to ask him a question, but the next time I'm up, he can hear me, I think it's not only $1 billion this biennium, but it's $250 million, and I can't remember if it's for 3 or 4 more. So there's plenty of money set aside to do this. So hopefully, at least that addresses the trust issue. And then we had the issue where we had way too many children. They're in public schools in Nebraska, that we're getting some state aid. Everybody gets some state aid, but it wasn't very much.
1 minute.
So the governor has committed $1,500 for every student in the state, regardless of what school district they're in. On top of that, we have for the first time, which we've also worked on for 6 years, trying to get 80% special ed for every kid in the state, 80%. So maybe some of those youngsters who were problematic, some of those schools, and I've heard this, and so did Senator McKinney, we don't have the resources, we don't know what to do. Hopefully with 80% of your expenses being covered, we can fix some of those problems. That's the goal. And when I get up next time, I'll talk about some of the stuff that was in the bill that we just passed this morning. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Senator Hunt, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will withdraw this bracket motion.
So ordered. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Senator, first of all, I have E&R amendments.
Senator Slama for a motion.
Mr. President, I move to adopt the E&R amendments to LB 583.
That is a debatable motion. Returning to the queue, Senator Brandt, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to the Education Committee for your hard work on this. Like a lot of us in here, I attended both a parochial school and a public high school, a public university, all in the state of Nebraska and all good. You just can't say enough about it. The secret ingredient in this is to have good teachers. It doesn't make any difference if they were at the university, at my high school, or at my parochial school. So thank you to all the teachers out there that got us this far. This bill does two things, like Senator Sanders indicated. It will increase special education funding that we refer to as SPED to 80%. The effect of that will not go fully into force for 2 years. And then at that time, we will have 80% inside the formula. I kind of like the TIOSA formula. TIOSA formula does two things. One, it determines need, and the second thing, it determines resources. And I think on the need side, it is fairly accurate when it takes poverty and 100 different elements and puts them together and said that this school district needs help. The flaw in the TIOSA formula is on the resource side. Because in Nebraska, we only use a sales-based approach to the valuation of the resource. And the TIOSA formula only takes the aggregate value of real estate in that school district as a resource, regardless of what the income generation capacity of that is. And we've seen a lot of that action in our large cities, small cities, and farms in the last 10 years. In Lincoln this last year, I've received a lot of emails, even though I do not represent any of the city of Lincoln, where their valuations have gone up 10 to 30%. That usually translates into taxes going up. And when you look at your tax statement, 2/3 of that tax statement goes to the local schools. So this bill would reimburse 80% of the SPED costs. Today, they get 46%. That's a tremendous increase. The second thing it does is it gives $1,500 as a minimum payment to every public school kid in the state, which is sorely needed. I can tell you in District 32 that I represent, we have 14 schools. 12 of them receive no equalization aid. Equalization aid is about 80% of all school costs. Because we receive no equalization aid, because the formula says our districts are very wealthy because of the value of our real estate, our property taxpayers bear the burden on that. This helps take a step in the right direction. It's roughly about 10% for most of my small districts. So I want to thank all of our school board members like Senator Linehan had. This is a rewarding job and a thankless job at the same time. I remember my dad was on school board for 8 years, and this is in the 80s. And you would get phone calls from a lot of people and a lot of things, and a lot of it wasn't about to say thank you for being on the school board. They were upset their kid got in trouble on the bus, or they had a specific teacher that they didn't get along with, or God forbid, coaching. A lot of this in small town Nebraska is about a coach and the kids on the team or not on the team. So thank you, school board members, for what you do. But most of all, I want to say thank you to the property taxpayers and the state for your support of our public schools. Without you, we wouldn't have the high quality schools that we have in the state of Nebraska. Thank you. Nebraska ranks about 49th in state aid to schools. This will help move us up the food chain a little bit, but Nebraska can be proud. We're about 25th in the nation on what we invest in schools, and a lot of that goes back to our property taxpayers, not only in the rural areas, but also in our big cities. The people in Lincoln and Omaha spend a lot of money in property taxes to support their schools. I would urge everybody to support LB 583 and encourage you to vote for it also. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brandt. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, good morning, colleagues. The queue must have juggled a little bit. I thought I had a bit more time to dig into the amendment and have had an opportunity to visit just very briefly with Senator Sanders and her great staff in regards to how the amendment works, and have had a chance to touch base with some educational policy stakeholders as well to just help me get a better understanding of it. But as I understand Senator Sanders' amendment that's filed and will be taken up as a course of this debate, that in essence, I think it's meant to be more technical in nature than substantive. And it has a host of different provisions to ensure it meets the policy goals related to providing more resources to all students, and particularly to address the disparities between equalized and non-equalized districts, to try and make sure that when we do that, look back in regards to special education needs, that we are meeting that 80% goal in providing that reimbursement. There seems to be, I think, some clarifying and strengthening aspects related to the different reporting requirements, slight adjustments in terms of how the Education Future Fund works, and an adjustment on certification dates to address just where we are in the calendar and otherwise. So in essence, I really do think that this looks like a technical cleanup bill to try and get the money where it needs to go. And I think that is the goal that the Education Committee and the Governor's Office and members of this body have committed to on general file. And then this helps us to meet those goals on Select Day through Senator Sanders' amendment. So the other thing that I just wanted to make sure that we were lifting up in regards to this very meaningful, important shift and change in terms of our educational funding policy is, I think that we can all agree that this is a very, very important, I was going to say first step, but that seems too small in terms of characterization, that this is a momentous point in terms of our educational policy and funding policy. But I think that we're also clear-eyed about the fact that this isn't the end of the conversation. And we know from the robust debate that happened on general file, Senator Hughes, Senator Brandt, and others have worked very hard to bring forward additional ideas to improve school funding and address property tax relief that are worthy of additional exploration and consideration by the Education Committee and the body as a whole. We also know that we haven't truly, I think, gotten to the heart of ensuring that we're providing the necessary resources for equalization aid as well. And I want to be clear that we've started a more robust conversation in the Education Committee about how we can address poverty and equity more appropriately, to provide a greater priority to that. And Senator Walz, thank you, Mr. President, has important legislation pending that I think the committee should take a hard look at in the interim and bring forward hopefully next year to adjust the poverty allowance. Senator Bostar, Senator Kavanaugh, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, and Senator Walz each have different components related to school nutrition and ensuring educational equity and student success and better health, that we really need to figure out how to put our heads together to get a move on those as well. And we need to, of course, just have the recognition and understanding that the large schools in our urban centers are doing a great job and have very, very low cost per pupil in terms of how they educate our kids. So we're at the top of those lists when it comes to student performance. We're at the bottom of those lists when it comes to teacher pay and state support for education. This helps to address some of those issues that have been identified, and we need to continue the conversation after we move forward LB 583. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Clements, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand in support of LB 583. And as Senator Linehan mentioned, I had a bill this year to create the Education Future Fund, which is $1 billion this fiscal year and $250 million the next fiscal year. And the funding after that has intent language that we intend to place $250 million per year into that. The legislature cannot bind future legislatures beyond this 2-year budget cycle. So the amount of that bill is $1.25 billion. The funding for the provisions in this bill is coming out of that Education Future Fund, which does fund additional money for special education and foundation aid of $1,500 per student, and 3 or 4 other priorities from that fund. And so the reason for the $1 billion up front, we're not spending that all at once. We're spending, I think this is around $300 million of expense of state aid, additional state aid. And the future fund makes it sustainable. There was a concern as to whether there would be funds in the future if the state promised to increase state aid. And so this is what the governor recommended, to set aside $1 billion and make it sustainable for many years. And so that just wanted to clarify that these provisions are going to be supported by the Education Future Fund that is in the budget. It's already taken out of what you see as money to the floor. It's not going to reduce the $700 million you see as money to the floor. It's already been accounted for in there. So I urge your green vote on LB 583. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clemens. Senator Frederickson has guests in the North Balcony, 4th graders from the Dual Language Academy in Omaha. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Breezy, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I rise in support of LB 583, and I thank Senator Sanders for her work on this. And this really is a step in the right direction. Some suggest we're 49th in the country in the amount of state funding the amount of education funding that comes from the state level. I think Senator Brandt alluded to that. I'm not sure if that number is correct, but we are truly pathetic in the amount of state funding that goes to some of our districts. And that's especially true in rural Nebraska, where many of our districts receive less than 10% of their funding from the state. My home district gets about 6.5% of their budget covered by state aid. Go compare that to OPS or some of the equalized districts, and it's a night and day difference. Also, you go the other direction, 6 miles down the road from my home district, and a local district gets 0.8% of its budget covered by the state. And folks, that really is unconscionable. But we talk all the time about reducing property taxes. Some insist the way to reduce our over-reliance on property taxes is to increase state aid to education. Well, here's our chance to do it. It's time to step up and inject some fairness into the way we fund public schools in Nebraska. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Breezy. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to say hi to the students. Senator John Kavanaugh and I are alumni from St. Joan of Arc. So it's really nice to have you all up there. I'm so curious how you like the school building and the gymnasium and the chapel. So I hope you all are having a wonderful visit to the Capitol today. It was really nice to see you. Thank you, Mr. President.
You've heard the motion to adopt the ENR amendments. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. They are adopted. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, series of amendments be withdrawn from Senator Sanders, AM 1230, 1229, 1175, and 1174. Mr. President, Senator Sanders would move to amend with AM 1636.
Senator Sanders, you're recognized to open on the amendment.
Thank you, and good morning again, Mr. President, colleagues. Today I'm introducing AM 1636 as a cleanup amendment to LB 583. First, I'd like to thank the Policy Research Office for identifying an error in AM 970, which will be adopted during general file debate. A small detail in the language of that amendment accidentally canceled out the special education funding increase. AM 1636 fixes that error and brings the bill in alignment with the goals stated on general file. That is the main function of the amendment. Additionally, AM 1636 makes changes to the reporting requirement that the body approved on general file. In addition to cleaning up the reporting requirement from AM 970, this amendment today specifies that the Department of Education must annually submit a report to the governor and the Appropriations and Education Committees. This report would detail special education expenditures and required reimbursement as prescribed by LB 583. This helps the legislature and the executive branch keep an eye on both functions of this funding change, both foundational aid and special education reimbursement. This also helps amend the reporting language to include, and I quote, other information as required by the department, unquote. This allows flexibility to make sure all relevant data can be collected. Additionally, the amendment changes the amount of foundation aid paid for by the Education Future Fund from 33% to 24%. Thus eliminating any general fund impact. Finally, the certification date is changed to accommodate the timing of the bill's potential passage. This amendment is necessary to carry out the special education funding reimbursement mechanism. I ask for your green vote on AM 1636. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, good morning, colleagues. Boy, I'm really getting my steps in this morning, and I'm grateful to have that movement and an opportunity to engage with so many people who are, I think, interested and engaged in this important policy debate. One thing that I did want to lift up, perhaps in terms of a cautionary note for us to think about into the future, and particularly in light if there were to be some economic downturns, which typically do happen on a cyclical nature. The question is usually just when we see a downturn and how deep that will be. But I want to make sure as we commit to this path that we're also thinking about kind of how our policy approach in Nebraska interplays with requirements on some of those federal dollars, and specifically in regards to the maintenance of effort that the federal law requires for us to draw down and to be able to utilize the funds that they provide for education funding as well. So once we set this bar, we have to be thoughtful and careful to not fall below this into the future. And even if we do face an economic downturn in the near term, midterm, or longer term, because if we do fall below the commitment that we're making in regards to this local effort, this maintenance of effort, we could risk potentially some federal clawback in terms of educational funds. So I just wanted to make sure that people were starting to think about this as we establish kind of a new commitment to providing this local effort or this maintenance effort, and how that interplays with existing federal law. Again, I don't pretend to be an expert on the matter. I am an enthusiastic student and learning more every day about the nuances in our education funding. But that's something that I just want the body to be clear-eyed about in regards to establishing this kind of new normal in terms of our state/local effort to support our kids and our kids with special needs in particular. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Clemens, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I support AM 1636. It's a technical correction to make sure that the funding is allocated correctly. Also, it does have reporting requirements for the Appropriations Committee, and especially on the Education Future Fund, we need to track how it's doing to make sure it's sustainable. The previous bill, 705 that was passed, the fiscal note that I received this morning, the detail on teacher recruitment was showing 7,300,000 and 6,500,000 in the first 2 years. But since then, I was told it's 10 million the first year and 10 million again the second year. And that $10 million per year will come out of the Education Future Fund on top of what this bill does. And so in 10 years, it's $100 million. So I think it's important for us to be tracking the Education Future Fund so we can keep it sustainable and allocate general funds. The Education Future Fund is only funded by general funds and will be needed to make transfers to it if it is going below a level that looks like it's sustainable. And so I appreciate the insertion of reporting requirements for AM 1636 so that we can track the future fund and see that the items that are coming out of it are not reducing it below sustainable levels. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clemens. Senator Lowe, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. As I was out campaigning, gosh, it's almost been 8 years ago now. Time does fly. The main thing that people talked about was reducing our property taxes. Out in central Nebraska, our property taxes had been increasing by 30%, 20%, 40% over the last several years during that time period. That's great because our property values were going up. The problem was we weren't selling, so we were just paying more for the land that we had already bought. That's because it costs to have schools. And it's been labored on our property owners to pay these costs. And when we came down here, we said, hey, we want to fix this. And what we found out was the schools didn't want the state involved because property taxes are pretty level. They go up a little bit at a time, almost always. But state revenue rises and falls, and so with that would be the revenue for the schools would rise and falls, and it was hard for them to budget what we did down here in Lincoln. But it's still not fair for the property tax and the owners of property. Now you say, well, I rent. You're still paying property tax because that property tax is included in your rent. And hence, your rents are going up. I know this because I own several pieces of property. And at one time, we could pay our property tax with 1 month's rent. It's gone up now to 3 months' rent, which means the income for me is down, and I still need to pay the bank. So I need to raise rents in order so I can cover that. So with this new boost of money coming in from the state to help, it will help our property tax payers, and it will help the schools, because they know, for the time being anyway, for the 10 years, this money will be coming into them. And that will help the schools out. They can budget that. That's a good thing. So I stand in support of LB 583 and AM 1636 for our property taxpayers, for our renters, for our Nebraska people. Because this year we have the money and we're able to do this. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Senator Lowe. Senator Merman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. I too want to rise in support of AM 1636 and the underlying bill, LB 583. As chair of the Education Committee, I really appreciate the work that the governor and the committee during the interim did on coming up with these ideas on how we can better fund public schools and at the same time provide property tax relief. That is two big challenges that the legislature has worked on in past, for a long time, past decades, and haven't made a lot of progress on. But this bill and the bills that go along with it in the Appropriations Committee and Revenue will go a long ways to improving the TIOSA formula. As has been mentioned before, the two big changes in the TIOSA formula is that $1,500 per student will be paid from the state to all public school students in the state. And that's a big change because right now there's 244 school districts in the state, and I don't have the exact number, but I think about 80 are equalized and the remainder school districts are unequalized. So the unequalized school districts receive no per student funding from the TIOSA formula, and almost no funding from the TIOSA formula. But this will make it much more fair across the state. Every student will receive that $1,500. And then the other big change is the 80% special ed reimbursement. And that's also a issue that's been worked on for decades. Right now, there's only 42% special ed reimbursement. So that will almost double the amount of special ed reimbursement available and make it much more fair to school districts and to students to get that 80% reimbursement. Special ed, of course, is a very important part of our educational system. Many students receive special ed, and it is expensive for school districts to provide that, but the school districts do deserve a much larger reimbursement for what they do to help students that need the special ed support. And as was mentioned before, Nebraska is 49th in the nation in the amount of funding that we provide from the state to schools. But that is a very misleading statistic because of our over-reliance on property taxes. We do support our schools well. We're 25th in the nation, or approximately 25th in the nation, and the amount of support we give to public schools. So this bill will improve that, and with the good work that was done by the governor and the committee in the interim, and then through the education committee, and with the cooperation also with the appropriations committee, with the guarantee of the Education Future Fund, I think everything works together to provide a much improved way in which we support the students that we have in our schools in Nebraska. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Merman. Senator Aguilar has some guests in the North Balcony, 60 fourth graders from Star Elementary in Grand Island. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Breezy, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, several of us have mentioned the need for property tax relief and how this bill relates to that. When you're talking about property tax relief, when you're talking about using state funds to yield property tax relief, you know, you have several different options. You can send it straight back to the taxpayers through the original property tax credit fund. You can send it straight back to the taxpayers through the 1107 credit, or you can send it back to your schools and hope it gets to the taxpayers. And so from my standpoint, you know, the intent for myself, and I think several others in here, is that these dollars that we're sending back to schools do yield property tax relief, ideally dollar for dollar. That's going to be hard to come by, but we would like to see that happen. And so we're going to need help. Nebraskans are going to need help from their local school boards and their school administrators to try to ensure that they do their best to ensure that these dollars yield property tax relief. And that is one of the reasons we have LB 589, that's the 3% revenue cap bill that's contained in LB 243 at this point, to try to ensure that happens. But really at the end of the day, you know, I would call upon school districts to recognize the intent really is for these dollars to yield property tax relief for everyday Nebraskans. And I think that's why Senator Sanders has a provision here in LB 583 that was going to require school districts to report annually on the amount of tax relief, the amount of property tax reduction they have attained every year. And that's going to tell us a lot. That's going to tell us, did these dollars yield property tax relief? Are these dollars yielding tax relief? And I really thank Senator Sanders for including that provision in here. I think it's a key part of this bill. It's a very important part of this bill. And but again, I would call upon school districts, administrators, school boards to help us out in this endeavor. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Breezy. Senator Slama, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today in support of LB 583 and of course in support of the technical amendment brought by Senator Sanders to secure the special education funding increase. Growing up in rural Nebraska, it really is an interesting experience, and it is unfortunate to see at times to see the negative impacts of how our state chooses to fund education. We say as a state that rural agricultural-based districts that have more farmable land are somehow wealthier on paper and therefore better suited through property taxes to keep the lights on and the doors open at their schools. Anybody who's ever worked in agriculture knows that you might have value on land on paper, but when it comes to actual income that your operation is bringing in each year, it's not even going to be close. So you have a false sense of wealth on paper paired with a lack of support from the state, with an assumption from the state that, good golly gosh, you can you can almost entirely rely on local property tax receipts in order to run your schools. Now, what happens in our rural districts are we have a tension between the ag community and our schools thanks to an artificial weight from the state. And the tension is that school board members who are just trying to provide basic services to their students, things that aren't even like AP classes or dual credit courses or advanced learning for kids that are talented, just basically trying to meet their needs, they're stuck between a rock and a hard place between their current levy and farmers who can't afford to pay more in property taxes. Property taxes are already absurdly high and putting an insurmountable amount of pressure on one of the largest contributors to Nebraska's economy. So you have ag leaders pushing back, not because they don't want high quality schools for their kids and for their community members, but because they can't afford to foot the bill. Now that stands in contrast to schools like Omaha and Lincoln and Millard, who receive the lion's shares of the state funding in the school aid formula. And at the core of this is our state has decided that we're going to value a kid in Pawnee City less than a kid in Papillion, the same kid in the same circumstances, the same background. We're going to give them less in state dollars if they're in Pawnee City, if they're in Papillion. We're going to give them less in state dollars if they're in Ogallala or Ord as opposed to Omaha. We decide the winners and losers on the front end for how we're funding our education system, and it's wrong. And if you want to really get to the core of why young people are leaving rural Nebraska, so much of it revolves around opportunities they have, economic opportunities they have, educational opportunities they have. And when you have a situation where the driver of the region's economy has the pressure against the school district and vice versa, you're not setting yourself up for long-term growth and success. And moreover, when kids are, from the start of their lives, not supported by the state as much as a kid who happens to live in a more populated part of the state, that doesn't set them up for success either. So I'm really grateful to Senator Sanders and to everybody on the committee who's worked towards LB 583. This has been a long time coming. It doesn't get us all the way to where we need to be when it comes to funding for education. I would say the first step would need to be getting rid of TIOSA altogether, simplifying the formula, and moving forward that way. But this is a strong step in the right direction to providing our rural schools with the funding they need to give every kid a great opportunity to succeed. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, an amendment to be printed from Senator DeBoer to LB 814 and a priority motion. Senator Clements would move to recess the body until 1:00 p.m.
There's been a motion to recess until 1:00. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. We are in recess.